This is a picture of my great-grandfather, Anthony Covert Darling. He was born on July 22, 1843, in the town of Lodi in Seneca County, New York. On January the 15th, 1862, at the age of 19, in Seneca County, New York, Anthony enlisted as a private to serve 3 years in Company H of the 102nd New York Infantry Volunteers. As a member of the 102nd New York, Anthony participated in many of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. In the summer of 2023, I toured 4 of the battlefields where Anthony and the 102nd met their bloodiest engagements. I felt honored to walk in the footsteps of a man who survived 3.5 years of war. This video highlights my journey to explore the hallowed grounds where my great-grandfather defied the odds of battle. He's a hero in my eyes. The Union Army of Virginia was formed on June 26, 1862, commanded by Major General John Pope. Within the Army of Virginia, the 102nd New York Infantry was assigned to the 2nd Corps under the command of Major General Nathaniel Banks. In early August 1862, the 2nd Corps was ordered to Culp, County, Virginia. Upon arrival, preparations were quickly made for action against General Thomas Stonewall Jackson's Confederate troops stationed near Gordonsville. The morning of August 9, 1862, dawned clear, with temperatures to climb into the high 90s. This is the field where the 102nd New York entered their first major battle. The Union's 2nd Corps was positioned on the right of this view, while Jackson's Confederates were on the left. This period map shows the 102nd New York anchoring the left flank of the Union forces under the command of Brigadier General Prince. This structure represents the Crittenton Gate, the gated intersection of the Culpeper Road and the Crittenton Family Farm Lane, where General Jackson anchored his forces. This is the view from the Confederate line, in the direction of the advancing 102nd New York. At that time, this area was a tall cornfield, offering visual concealment to the front, but no protection from the intense cannon fire from the mountain on the left. The experience of this Union advancement was vividly recorded by First Lieutenant Aaron Bates, Company D, the 102nd New York Infantry. As we come over the brow of the hill, our men are fearfully mowed down, but not one faltered. Our musketry was without any cessation, and theirs was the same. The balls came in perfect sheets around us. Besides this, flank batteries played upon us with heavy shell. This was the line of defense for the Confederate right flank, the initial goal of Prince's 2nd Brigade advance. General Jackson rallied his Confederate forces to repel these attacks and drove the Union Army from the field. The Battle of Cedar Mountain claimed a total of 3,691 casualties. Anthony survived this battle to carry on his service to the Union. Major General Nathaniel Banks led the defeated and demoralized 2nd Corps of the Army of Virginia a long and arduous trek into Maryland. After the 2nd Corps crossed the Potomac, it was assigned to the Army of the Potomac under the command of Major General George McClellan, then reorganized into the 12th Corps, with Major General Joseph Mansfield commanding. Brigadier General George Greene took command of the 2nd Division. Colonel Henry Steinrook was appointed command of the 2nd Brigade. Recently promoted, Lieutenant Colonel James Lane remained in command of the 102nd New York. The night of September the 16th found the 12th Corps bivouac near Sharpsburg, Maryland, east of the Antietam Creek near the Upper Bridge. The Upper Bridge stands today much as it did in 1862. This bridge allowed passage over Antietam Creek for both the 1st and the 12th Corps. This is the first location where I was certain that I was walking in my great-grandfather's footsteps. I'm gaining a fuller understanding of Anthony's journey through this area and thankful to experience this short walk through history. A steady rain began at 10 p.m. At the same time, the Corps was ordered to cross the Antietam by the Upper Bridge and proceed to a position to support the scheduled early morning action by the Union 1st Corps. This is a view of the general area where the 12th Corps, after an exhausting midnight march, halted to rest in the furrows of a plowed field. The field where the 102nd New York rested had recently been manured. The Battle of Antietam began at 5:30 in the morning of September the 17th, with the 1st Corps engaged in a fierce battle in the East Woods and the adjacent cornfield. With just a few hours of rest, the 102nd New York State Volunteers entered the field for duty at 6:30 a.m., where they were immediately marched to the East Woods and positioned on the left flank of the brigade. At approximately 7:30 a.m., Major General Joseph Mansfield was mortally wounded while leading reinforcing troops into the Battle of the East Woods. He was in command of the 12th Corps for only 3 days. The fighting was fierce as Colonel Steinrook pushed the 2nd Brigade through the Confederate lines. With the East Woods cleared, the 102nd New York continued south through an open field, crossed the Smoketown Road, and advanced to a group of farm buildings owned by Samuel Mumma. Early in the morning of September 17th, Confederate forces occupied the buildings on the Mumma farm. With battles raging north of his location, Brigadier General Roswell S. Ripley, a Confederate brigade commander, worried that his position would be overrun, and Union sharpshooters would use the structure as cover to pick off his troops. At 6:30 a.m., General Ripley gave the order to burn the house. The Mama House was the only structure deliberately destroyed during this battle. Lieutenant Colonel James Lane reported that after passing through the woods, taking the left of the burning building in a field beyond, from this building, our men pursued the enemy to the cornfield in advance, where the 102nd halted and commenced firing at a battery which was playing on the right of the brigade, just beyond the cornfield. The battery retired immediately after our opening fire upon it. At this time, I marched the regiment by the right flank to rejoin the brigade, which was in position behind the battery of Parrott guns to the right of the cornfield. As the Steinruck Brigade advanced forward toward the Dunker Church and into bloody conflict in the West Woods, Lieutenant Colonel Lane reported that the 102nd remained in support of the guns. While the 102nd was supporting the Rhode Island Battery, vicious fighting was happening just south of them. The sunken road was a dirt farm lane where Confederate troops built a strong defense. For over 3 hours, the Confederates withstood multiple Union advances. However, by 1 p.m., the Confederates were routed and 5,500 soldiers lie dead or wounded. This road would thereafter be referred to as the Bloody Lane. By 5:30 p.m., the Battle of Antietam was over. The 102nd New York retired along with the 2nd Corps to the woods east of the Mama Farm, where arms were stacked and rations given out. September the 17th, 1862, remains to this day the bloodiest day in America. 125,000 American soldiers fought a series of fierce battles over a grueling 12-hour period on farmland owned by peaceful German immigrants. After the battle, 22,747 casualties littered the fields of Sharpsburg, Maryland. During this battle, Clara Barton brought supplies and nursing aid to the wounded. This act of love and mercy led to the establishment of the present-day American National Red Cross. The Battle of Antietam was a much-needed victory for the Union forces. President Abraham Lincoln personally congratulated General McClellan for this victory and soon after issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Anthony survived this day where 37 of his fellow 102nd New York soldiers did not. 2 days after the Battle of Antietam, the 12th Corps left the bloody fields, where the Confederate dead still lie unburied, on a march to Harper's Ferry, where they took up overwatch of the strategic location on the Potomac. On October 15, 1862, Major General Henry W. Slocum was appointed commander of the 12th Corps. Brigadier General John Geary was assigned to command the 2nd Division. The 102nd New York was transferred from the 2nd to the 3rd Brigade under the command of Brigadier General George Greene. James Lane was promoted to full colonel and remained in command of the regiment. The 12th Corps remained at Harper's Ferry until December the 10th, when orders were issued to move to Fairfax Station, Virginia. Upon arrival, the dismal news of the brutal Union defeat at Fredericksburg was received. The 102nd New York celebrated New Year's Day, 1863, at Fairfax Station where they stayed until January the 19th. The 12th Corps joined the Army of the Potomac in an attempt to cross the Rappahannock River near Falmouth, Virginia. On the night of January the 20th, rain began, and by the morning the earth was soaked and the river swollen. The storms continued for 2 days, making the river crossing impossible. This campaign would be remembered as the infamous Mud March. With the river crossing abandoned, the 12th Corps withdrew to Stafford, Virginia, where winter quarters were established. Over 135,000 Union Army of the Potomac soldiers established winter camps throughout Stafford County. This was the largest encampment of any army during the Civil War. The Army of the Potomac reached its lowest point in men, morale, and equipment after its defeat at the Battle of Fredericksburg and the disastrous Mud March. This winter encampment was commonly compared to the Valley Forge encampment of 1777-1778 during the Revolutionary War. The 12th Corps Winter Headquarters was located at the Stafford Courthouse. General Geary's 2nd Division was assigned to Aquia Creek, where some soldiers assisted with unloading the river vessels that arrived laden with supplies. This location is where a 2nd Division redoubt was built in February of 1863. 4 rifled artillery guns and 100 soldiers guarded the Union supply depot at Aquia Landing and the nearby 2nd Division camps. Anthony may have been stationed here for defense or maybe at the wharf for supply unloading. All of the Army of the Potomac campsites have been lost to time and development, except for this 41-acre site that the city and county of Stafford has preserved. This area was utilized by the 11th Corps, and these remains represent a typical Army encampment. During the winter camp of 1863, Major General Joseph Hooker was appointed commander of the Army of the Potomac. Hooker's energetic command style, along with abundant resupply and continuous effective training, quickly returned the Army to a disciplined unit capable of meeting the challenge of General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army. On April 27, 1863, General Slocum marched his rested and rejuvenated 12th Corps against and through the Confederate outposts at Kelly Ford, Virginia, then continued across the Rappahannock River. The next day, 12th Corps crossed the Rapidan River at Germania Ford on their way to Chancellorsville. Chancellorsville was a lone brick house at a minor crossroads in the waste area, appropriately known as the Wilderness. Thick growth of pine and oak, tangled with undergrowth, severely limited visibility and made movement very difficult for massed troops. By 11 a.m. on May 1st, 1863, the 12th Corps anchored the Union right flank. Slocum had moved into a relatively open country and reached strong positions along Plank Road. This road was later renamed in his honor. General Geary, in his official report describing the movements of his 2nd Division troops during this reconnaissance under fire, says the conduct of Greene's brigade was admirable at this juncture. Although it was exposed for quite a length of time to the fire of the enemy in a position where they could neither shelter nor defend themselves, nor return the assault, they bore themselves with the calmness and discipline of veterans. At 2 p.m., General Hooker ordered the 12th Corps to pull back into a defensive position centered on a clearing at the Fairview House and extending to a clearing at Hazel Grove. The brigade worked all afternoon and well into the night in constructing a breastwork of logs and tree trunks covered with earth to create a strong defensive position. The day ended with 2 strategically elevated clearings in Union control. The 12th Corps lines remained generally the same until the early morning of May the 3rd. The fiercest fighting of the battle, and the second bloodiest day of the Civil War, occurred when Confederate Major General Jeb Stuart launched an attack upon the Union right flank. General Stuart was in temporary command of Stonewall Jackson's corps. The famous Lieutenant General Stonewall Jackson was mortally wounded on the evening of May the 2nd by friendly fire. By 7 a.m. on May the 3rd, the high ground at Hazel Grove was abandoned by order of Major General Hooker. Confederate artillery immediately occupied this area with over 30 cannon and began an artillery duel with the Union guns at Fairview. Throughout this fierce battle, artillery fire raked the whole length of General Greene's defenses. As the Confederate forces advanced, the fighting became close-quartered and hand-to-hand, during which the 102nd New York captured a battle flag and several prisoners from the 12th Georgia Regiment. For 5 hours, fighting raged in these woods as opposing troops attacked, retreated, and attacked again through the brush-choked woods. More than 17,500 men fell in the morning slaughter. I felt a sense of awe to be walking on this field where the 102nd New York and my great-grandfather Anthony stood in defense against intense cannon fire from their right, accompanied by musket fire from the front. This is a view of the area where General Greene's 3rd Brigade held their line on the bloody morning of May the 3rd. The 12th Corps maintained their defensive positions until, running short on ammunition, they were ordered to withdraw. By 10:30 a.m., Hooker's army was in full retreat. The Army of the Potomac withdrew to the north side of the Rappahannock River and returned to their winter camps. The 12th Corps marched their way through rain and mud while traveling 23 miles back to Stafford Courthouse. General Greene's brigade returned to Aquia Creek, where late in the night they reoccupied their abandoned roofless huts. Over 154,000 soldiers were engaged in the 3-day Battle of Chancellorsville. 30,764 casualties littered the fields in this wilderness, where the 102nd New York contributed 90 souls. Anthony was again fortunate to survive the second most deadly day in American history. After the victory at Chancellorsville, General Robert E. Lee directed his Confederate forces through the Shenandoah Valley and crossed the Potomac into Maryland. With this movement by Lee, it became evident to Union officers that an invasion of Pennsylvania was intended. The Army of the Potomac crossed into Maryland and moving in lines parallel with that of Lee, keeping its forces between the Confederates and Washington. On June 28, 1863, Major General George Meade relieved Major General Joseph Hooker in command of the Army of the Potomac. Meade continued to follow Lee while moving his army to the strategically located town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Our first stop on our visit to the Gettysburg National Military Park was to the Museum and Visitor Center. Here, we marveled at the 40-foot-tall, 132-year-old cyclorama, depicting the fury of the doomed final Confederate assault known as Pickett's Charge. General Meade's Army of the Potomac occupied the high ground south of Gettysburg. The Army's defensive lines resembled the shape of a fishhook. On July 1, 1863, Brigadier General John Geary, commanding the 2nd Division of the 12th Corps, reported that his division had formed a defensive position on the left of 1st Corps, south of the town of Gettysburg, and located on Cemetery Hill. This movement was completed by 5 p.m., with no enemy action throughout the night. Major General Henry Slocum was placed in command of the entire right flank of the Union Army. When General Meade asked for Slocum's tactical advice on the battle, he famously said, "Stay and fight it out." The command of the 12th Corps transferred to Brigadier General Alpheus Williams. At 5 a.m. on July 2nd, General Geary's 2nd Division was ordered to the right of the main line of battle and east of the Baltimore Turnpike. General Greene's 3rd Brigade of Geary's 2nd Division occupied the extreme left of the division on Culp's Hill. This was a steep and rocky location, which was a continuation of Cemetery Hill. The 3rd Brigade was comprised of 5 regiments that included the 102nd New York Volunteers and my great-grandfather Anthony. George Sears Greene entered West Point at age 18 and graduated 2nd of 35 in the class of 1823. After graduation, he stayed at the academy until 1827 as an assistant professor of mathematics and engineering. One of the students he taught during this period was Cadet Robert E. Lee. General Greene reported that his position was covered with a heavy growth of timber, free from undergrowth, with large ledges of rock projecting above the surface. The surface was very steep on our left, diminishing to a gentle slope on our right. As soon as we were in position, we began to entrench ourselves and throw up breastworks of logs, cordwood, stones, and earth. By 12 o'clock, we had a good cover for the men. The left flank of the 102nd New York's position met the right flank of the 60th New York, who were stationed in defense of the summit. The line of breastworks protecting the 102nd extended across the slope of the hill, incorporating the rock ledges, followed the contour of the hill, then down to where the slope decreased. This short earthen berm that I'm walking next to represents the line of the 102nd New York's protective breastworks. The right flank of the 102nd met the left flank of the 149th New York. The 102nd New York's line measured approximately 300 yards from right to left. The defense of Culp's Hill was significant in that the 12th Corps line guarded the main Union supply line on the Baltimore Pike and the rear of the Union Army on Cemetery Hill. At 4 p.m., the Union artillery positioned on the top of Culp's Hill engaged in a duel with a Confederate battery posted on a hill across Rock Creek. This cannonade lasted about 30 minutes with the silencing of the Confederate guns. At 7 p.m., Major General Slocum ordered General Geary to move his division to support the Union left flank at Little Round Top, then under intense pressure. Geary left Greene's 3rd Brigade, consisting of only 1,300 men, to occupy the line of works of the entire 12th Corps. As General Greene was positioning his forces to occupy the vacated breastworks, the entire line was attacked by a superior Confederate force. General Geary reported this engagement in definite terms. Greene's brigade now behaved with the most unflinching gallantry, sustaining their desperate position during an incessant attack of 2.5 hours from vastly superior numbers. During this time, the noble brigade repelled 4 separate and furious charges on their entire line without losing a foot of ground. During this engagement, Colonel Lane, commanding the 102nd New York Volunteers, was severely wounded. Command of the regiment fell upon Captain Louis Stegman, who later reported that the 102nd New York Volunteers never left its position, nor did one man flinch from his full duty. Sporadic gunfire continued throughout the night, allowing little rest for the weary regiment. General Geary returned with the bulk of the division at 1:30 a.m. on July the 3rd. At 3:30 a.m., fighting resumed with devastating intensity. The 102nd New York held their position against fearfully destructive fire until being relieved at 9 a.m. With just 20 minutes to maintain their weapons, resupply ammunition, and rest, the 102nd New York Volunteers were back at the breastworks, defending against a determined adversary. This was a remarkable fight. For 7 hours, the unremitting roar of cannon and rifles continued along the front of the 12th Corps. At no place on the field of Gettysburg did the Confederate dead lie thicker than along the front of General Geary's 2nd Division. At the time of the defense of Culp's Hill, a dramatic assault by over 12,000 Confederate infantry against the Union positions on Cemetery Ridge was underway. General Lee incorrectly assumed a weakness in the Union center and ordered Confederate Lieutenant General Longstreet's corps to charge across a mile of open fields to assault this assumed weakness. The attack, which would be infamously referred to as Pickett's Charge, was repulsed by overwhelming cannon fire and eventually hand-to-hand combat at the Rock Wall. This battle is referred to as the high water mark of the rebellion and marked the turning point of the war in the Union's favor. With this loss, Lee withdraws his army from Gettysburg on July the 4th and returns to Virginia. Over 165,000 soldiers were engaged in the three-day Battle of Gettysburg. 51,112 casualties littered this Pennsylvania landscape, where the 102nd New York Volunteers contributed 29. Anthony was a surviving member of a brigade of soldiers that General Geary described as having a higher grade of true courage, self-denial under trying difficulties and hardships, deprived of shelter and exposed to continuous rains. Their only bed, the hard rock of the hill that they had vowed to defend. Reduced for many days in their supplies and deprived of rest day and night by the incessant attack of the fresh troops of the enemy. Each man seemed to vie with his comrade in exhibiting his superior quality of bravery, which distinguishes the true soldier from the mere creature of military discipline. Fitting praise for the steadfast defense of Culp's Hill. On November the 19th, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln attended the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery at Gettysburg. Here he delivered one of the best-known speeches in American history. A portion of this speech that best describes my feelings of the consequences of this battle reads as follows. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Beginning on Memorial Day and ending on Labor Day, each evening a bugler will sound taps. This is an emotionally moving tribute to honor the fallen laid to rest at the Gettysburg National Cemetery. My journey to walk in the footsteps of my great-grandfather ended at Gettysburg. From Gettysburg, Anthony's battlefield journeys and the country's Civil War struggles would continue for another 2 years. The 12th Corps would go on to fight in Tennessee and Georgia, where Anthony re-enlisted as a veteran on January the 30th, 1864. Eventually, the 12th Corps was disbanded and merged along with the 11th Corps into the new 20th Corps of the Army of the Cumberland. The 102nd New York Volunteers were among the troops that were first to enter the defeated city of Atlanta. The 20th Corps was next assigned to the Army of Georgia that anchored the left wing of Major General William Tecumseh Sherman's infamous March to the Sea. Anthony was promoted to corporal on December the 7th, 1864, while on the march through Georgia. After the surrender of the city of Savannah, Georgia, General Geary's 2nd Division of the 20th Corps were the first to enter that city. As Sherman moved his forces into the Carolinas, the 20th Corps was involved in the 3-day battle at Bentonville, North Carolina, the last large-scale engagement of the Civil War. The fighting ended for Anthony and the 20th Corps on April the 26th, 1865, with the surrender of General Joseph Johnson's Confederate forces at Durham Station, North Carolina. At the end of the war, the 20th Corps marched back to Washington, D.C., with a short stop in the defeated Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. Anthony had marched 1,400 miles in the year since they left Tennessee at the start of Sherman's march on Atlanta. Upon arrival in Washington, Anthony and 102nd New York Volunteers participated in the Grand Army Review on May 23rd and 24th of 1865. Over 200,000 soldiers marched from the Capitol building to the White House before the largest crowds ever seen in that city. After faithfully serving for 3 years and 7 months, Anthony, along with his regiment, was mustered out of service at Alexandria, Virginia on July 21st, 1865. At war's end, Anthony left the horrors of battle behind him to settle for a time in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. He married and fathered 4 sons, with the 4th being my grandfather Leon. By 1885, Anthony moved his family far away from the lands of Civil War strife to the small village of Waterman, Illinois, where he farmed the fertile prairie soil. The Darling family grew and prospered in the tranquility and abundance of prairie living. In 1913, Anthony participated in the 50th anniversary reunion of the Battle of Gettysburg, viewing the familiar fields and reuniting with past comrades in arms. On July 4th, 1929, at the age of 85, Anthony answered the last roll call and passed away peacefully at his home, surrounded by his loving family. Quoting from his obituary, published in the DeKalb, Illinois Daily Chronicle, Anthony Darling worked earnestly and persistently as a farmer, that he might have the comforts which constitute happiness. He lived a life characterized by loyalty, kindness, industry, and patriotism. That's a fitting tribute to a life well lived. My interest in researching the life of my great-grandfather was heightened when two of my children and I visited Anthony's grave. From this visit, I made plans to one day explore his Civil War experiences. I was fortunate to finally visit the areas of his most intense conflicts. I thoroughly enjoyed walking in my great-grandfather's battlefield footsteps. I also enjoyed the research to support this video. My hope is that this video will be a witness to later generations of my family, so that Anthony's sacrifice will be a shining example. The sacrifice of a man who volunteered to serve his country in that country's time of need. He's a hero in my eyes.